The facility started about 20 years ago as a traditional architecture practice, and I got involved with the business about 10 years ago and changed the focus of the company. So now we're much more of an innovation and sustainability practice as well as an architecture practice. So we have a mixture of engineers, research staff and architects. There's a few reasons. Part of it is just my personality and my background. I'm very passionate about trying to find better ways of doing things. So I've always been involved in innovation in various guises throughout my career. And I think another major reason actually is just the frustration that I found within the built environment for projects not going ahead. And I'd ask the question why, and very often it was there was a technical reason or there was a funding reason. So I thought to myself, well, why don't we solve those problems? Why don't we help our clients and try to get projects to move forward? So that's when we played a much more active role in the early stages of projects and also in innovating and coming up with ideas. The first project that really changed the organisation and changed the direction was it was called Light at the End of the Tunnel, and it was a design competition that we won, and it's where we came up with a very innovative solution to solve an engineering problem, a civil engineering problem, whereby there was lots of vibration in railway infrastructure. And so we came up with the concept of, instead of dampening that energy within the infrastructure, actually turning it into electricity. So you're taking away the negative aspects of the vibrations within the structure and generating something very useful. And that turned into energy harvesting, which then turned into footfall energy harvesting. And we ended up developing one of the world's first ever footfall energy harvesting systems, whereby we would capture the energy of people working on flooring surfaces. And that really took us to the next level in terms of R&D and coming up with ways of applying innovation as well. The obvious challenge is funding. It costs a huge amount of money, much more than you would initially think, to bring a technology to market. And who pays for it? If you're a small organisation, you don't have dedicated research and development budgets as such, unless that is your core competency as an organisation. So trying to supplement our own resources to innovate, we use a variety of sources, government funding, private sector funding, venture capital, angel funding, various types of mechanisms as well, collaboration, partnership. And that is very time consuming, can be quite challenging, and also the little matter of the recession that we're allegedly coming out of at the moment did dramatically change the whole environment for people funding risk and innovation when that started. Other challenges have been the kind of mentality of the sector itself. There is a reluctance to change. There's even a resistance to change in some aspects of the industry. Most of our clients are public sector or third sector, and those organisations are very risk averse. They like to use things that are safe, tried, tested. So bringing something new and innovative has particular challenges that you have to overcome. To integrate something into the built environment, there's lots of various regulations and compliances that you need to incorporate and comply with an adapted technology or innovation. And I like to partner, I like to reuse and use existing components if I can and incorporate it. Supply chain is an issue because there's often a lot of compliance that goes around incorporating things into the built environment. So when we go to suppliers and manufacturers of existing building elements and try to incorporate our innovation or adapt their components to create a system, for instance, often just the materials aren't there, or there's a lack of desire to adapt their components or materials, which means that you either are left with having to create something from scratch, or you have to look outside the built environment, other industries. An example of that would be with our energy harvesting devices. We developed a cassette that would go into stair treads to capture the energy of people climbing stairs. Within the built environment, if you're using a staircase in a public space, or a public space rather, there's a lot of regulation around slip resistance, about wear and tear, about visibility, things like people that are visually impaired. So complying with all those aspects, you have to have materials and components that are robust and also meet those requirements. So using the existing supply chain, if they're reluctant to adapt or work with you to adapt their materials and components, it leaves you with quite a challenge in either meeting those requirements and demands yourself, which is very costly and time consuming, or having to look elsewhere and see if you can adapt something else. But that of course creates additional problems, because you then have to get this new system that you've created approved and warranted and compliant before you can bring it to market. The built environment itself, how it operates, what its drivers are, what its blockages are, and one of the key words that you will hear time and time again is risk. It's a very risk-averse industry, and there's very good reasons for that. One is the amount of capital that goes into creating a building. It's a huge investment, and the returns on that investment are sometimes very, very long. So that inherently creates risk for the people funding. Another is the fact that it's quite a dangerous place of building sites. The built environment has quite a high percentage of deaths and injuries at work. So health and safety is a very, very key consideration to a lot of organisations. And then also when the building's in use. If there's a mistake with a building, there's a risk that there are penalties on the developer or whoever's built the building. There's collateral warranties, there's warranties that are defects and liabilities that come into play. So the cost of rectifying something can be quite prohibitive. One area of support that I think would be particularly useful, particularly for smaller organisations, is dissemination of information, but really relevant information. There's a huge amount to consider when you're innovating for the built environment, and often an organisation might not be fully aware of all of the things that they need to consider. And a lot of that information exists, a lot of the information is out there, but it's not aggregated in one place. It's quite disparate and spread out, and often you have to pay for it as well. And whilst I think good quality content should be paid for, it can create a barrier for a small organisation because they've got limited resources. Therefore, if they're having to pay for a piece of information and not, say, invest more on their technology they're developing, they might be reluctant to do so. I'll give you a practical example of that. So I've actually seen other organisations who've developed technologies for the built environment and not been aware, for instance, about having to comply with planning regulations or fire safety, for instance. And they've spent a lot of time, a lot of money, a couple of years sometimes, coming up with a really nice idea, but that idea could be killed dead in the water just because they haven't considered these fundamental aspects of working with the built environment. So if there was a resource where organisations could go to and access this information in an easy to search format, and importantly open source or free, because that obviously stops that cost barrier, then I think that would help people make much more informed decisions earlier on. We as an organisation have kind of aggregated that information ourselves, but it's taken a lot of time, years, and a lot of mistakes to find out the correct ways of doing things. and ways of not doing things. So I think that would be very useful, and I know that the BRE is very good at doing that, and we've worked with them in the past, and they've been a very useful resource to us. I would say that you need two heads. You need one head that is your blue sky thinking, creative, innovative, passionate thinker, that there's no problem that can't be overcome, that there's not an answer to any, there's always an answer to every technical challenge. You need that to come up with the ideas. It's like brainstorming. The golden rule of brainstorming is that you never say no. So you need that kind of creative, positive outlook to innovate. But understanding the built environment, you also need to have another head. And that head has to be much more diligent, focused, serious, and you need to be very, very pragmatic. You need to understand how the industry works, and you have to be prepared for disappointment. You have to be prepared for rejection, and you have to realise that there's a huge amount of politics, and that you have to do a lot of politics to get your technology to market. And it's very difficult to separate those two personality types and emotions. So some organisations, they'll have two people. They'll have the grey suit that goes out there and makes sure that things happen, and they have the guy in the jeans and the t-shirt that comes up with the great ideas. But in a small organisation, you might not have that luxury. So you have to sometimes be able to divorce yourself and think one way when you're being creative, but then think in a completely different way, in a much more realistic, pragmatic way, if you actually want your product to get into the marketplace. We are continuing to be innovative. We're very excited about some of the things that we're developing and working on. One of which is something that we've received Technology Strategy Board funding for. And that is where we're coming up with a system to insulate buildings on the outside, but without using scaffolding. And hopefully without using wet trades as well. And the idea is that we effectively have a form of robotic device that is able to measure the building, apply insulation, and then finish the building. I won't talk too much about it because a lot of it is quite confidential at the moment, but that's the basic principle. It's called Project Cocoon. We're very excited about it, and we think that it has great potential to be a real changer within the industry.